Good morning, everybody. Delighted to have you here with us to hear from my wonderful colleague and friend, Pedro Tarak, who has been an influencer beyond words, really, in the Latin American continent and beyond. A founder of Sistema B, which is our partner organization in BLAB. He is not only a founder, he's a social investor, he is a thought leader, he's a systems change thinker, and he's also by background a lawyer, which is very helpful as we come to look at what are the issues we're facing in our world today in corporate governance that could really change the way we operate as a business, as a force for good. And one of the reasons we're running these Coffee in Good Company series is because there's an extraordinarily unique opportunity that the European Commission have opened up for us to review what are the right and most effective ways in which businesses can be governed and managed to ensure we run and lead a sustainable future for our future generations. And this opportunity has really opened up that the issue of what is stakeholder governance and stakeholder management is really quite blurred, I think. We're all learning as we go, and there's an enormous amount we can learn from just sharing experience and hearing others who have gone on this journey before from what they've learned. We will be picking up this debate as soon as the European Commission produce their proposal. And in the meantime, please enjoy these series of conversations and take them with you into your business. But now I'm going to move over to our discussion with Pedro. Welcome, Pedro. It's so lovely to have you with us in Europe.
Thank you very, very much. You know, Europe is very, very dear to me. As we shared the news of the B Corps in 2014.
Yes, Pedro, Sistema B actually has been operating. Tell me a little bit about the background of your role in Sistema B.
Well, together with three other friends, Juan Pablo Larenas, who's today the executive director of the network of BLAB Global, Gonzalo Munoz, who's a climate champion under the COP, the climate convention, and Maria Emilia Correa, who's a Colombian entrepreneur and also a thought leader. We started Sistema B in 2012, and with the systemic approach, right from the scratch. So if you look into this design of System B, it's designed and based on two principles: interdependence and the collective being of any human being, but also of any corporation. So it includes the B Corps, of course, and they're the Trojan horse, but then it includes the major market players that actually set the trends, like large corporations and governments in their procurement role. It includes the government in their regulatory role. It includes the investment world, and it includes the world of knowledge and public opinion, I would say, influences from any avenue of life. So this is the system, and that's the basis of whatever we do in terms of I would say, in terms of stakeholders, where the center are the companies, the markets, and the economy, and not only one of the pieces.
Yes,
so that's the mindset.
The mindset. And we've talked before about the importance of it bringing together all these historical pieces of development, and what the B Corp movement was doing within that system was joining many dots together and bringing together a sort of piecemeal discussion. Can you just sort of elaborate a little bit how you see that? Because it's a beautiful image that you present.
Well, yes. The way I see B Corps is that basically they're in the forefront of how we return back to our whole, to the whole being. And on the one hand, they enable us to elevate the purpose of the company, right? And that means purpose means many things depending on the culture and on the people. But it can mean, the inner calls, right from that level to match and align to responses to societal needs and market needs. And that's where you have the matching of all the dimensions of a human being, but also of a human organization. And then, at the same time, it enables us to go from this piecemeal logic of having, I don't know, money-making side of us, and then we have doing good for society, doing good for nature, and also to think in terms of short-term needs and long-term needs, and how that can be actually integrated into a measurement and reporting system. So that's also a novelty. And thirdly, I see that the governance side, that enables us to expand the duty for care, the fiduciary duty, not only limited to the shareholders, but also to balance the different interests and needs of all stakeholders from a short-term, but also long-term perspective. And of course, we all know that long-term perspective for stakeholders also benefits long-term interest to shareholders. But this is because we have in our minds the separation of shareholders and stakeholders, when everybody is part of the stake. I mean, we're all stakeholders, right? So this is the way I see the B Corps, giving the example and not only leading the way for others to reconsider, but to open up the horizon of the kind of questions we need to reinvent the genetics, not only of business, but of market dynamics and of economics.
Wonderful. And this point that actually all stakeholders are kind of, with the business is a microcosm of this entire system. Each one of these holds all these different important players. And the point you made about that everybody benefits in the long term, if we can get to the long term, is so important, I think, in the discussions in Europe around whether, if Europe is to be really bold and make some sustainable corporate governance kind of legislation proposals that are really quite far-reaching, what will this do to the competitiveness of Europe? There's a potential perception it could in some way short-term give extra costs that might make them less competitive. So I'd just be interested in how we can create that long-term mindset, because that will stop any risk of dilution of ideas, because the short-term may seem to affect the competitiveness.
It's a great point. Competitiveness also needs to be reframed.
Yes.
I mean, if competitiveness means lower costs only, or if competitiveness is driven by value creation. And if you look backwards, I wouldn't say that European costs are lower than most of the equivalent products elsewhere. Yet, European goods and services are very competitive. And it has to do not because only the financial and economic side, but because of the value created behind its services. I still remember a long time ago when I used to live in Europe, in Germany, I was really, struck by the fact that Germany was in 1980 deciding as a country that during those times you didn't have the unified Germany, but the Western Germany was deciding for a policy for basically it was amazing. It was a solar policy, solar energy policy, and there I was in Bonn, where I still remember like 9 months of clouds. You see, like continuous clouds, and I couldn't believe that country was thinking, so long away from 1980, and it was basically to create the competitiveness of the German industry, of the German solar industry, for quite a while, and today the solar industry is tremendously competitive. You see, so it all depends where you stand. You see, if it's the short term or the long term, and how you prepare. You know, the secret of all this, of any nation, of any city, of any company, is to have a very, full-fledged organization. You see, to be really sound in how it organizes itself for the short term and long term, and from the sectorial to the holistic. So once you start redesigning yourself for the holistic, I think the time has come for holistic design and holistic organization, management, and governance.
Yes.
And once you get into holistic, then you understand yourself as part of society and part of nature, not as us and society, us and the diversity of society, and us and the earth, but as a holistic unit. And that's where I feel that we need to reinvent, our governance. And we have some clues of how to do this, because we are all testing everywhere in the world. We're testing in that direction, and we have a combination in the law, and definitely we need to get into law. And I used to be a lawyer. I'm not a practicing lawyer, but there's some previous understandings that are helping me.
Yeah.
And so you can combine different legal tools. You can combine the shareholder agreement. If the legislation, improves, then we might have special legislation that elevates the purpose for all companies, and not only for specialized companies or big or benefit corporations. And in that case, that will help a lot. You see, all companies expanding, its purpose, and two, its share, the notion of shareholder value. I mean, if you interconnect the notion of shareholder value to all the other stakeholders related to the company, the ones which are directly related, but also the neighbors. Also, once you go not only long term, but you go into international value chains, you basically need to consider almost all the interests. And of course, you need the scoping exercise there.
Yes. And I was just going to ask you a little bit about, and we'll move on to some practical examples, because you're not only thinking in these concepts, but you're also living it in your business connections. But just a little bit about what you think are the biggest barriers to us making this holistic connection, and the role and power of government to shape that starting point. If we do change the laws, will that be enough, or will we need to do a lot of other things as well? And should we start with government policy, or should we start with other mechanisms that will drive the change?
Right. Yeah, great. As we all know, you have the law, the public law, the legislation, and then of course you do have you have the law that you actually co-create with your partners in a company, right? And that's private law, but it's still law. I mean, eventually you can go to courts if one of the parties did not abide to what you've agreed. It's contracts, commercial contracts. There you can actually invent a lot, right? You can co-create a lot, and one way could be basically a shareholder agreement. You can do it by, the different decisions of the board, but then you can also create the special impact trusts.
Yes.
As you have it in Uruguay today, the law already acknowledges the impact trusts, but you can also do it through private law. So there's a dance going on in between private law co-creation by any of us who belong to companies, and then you want the clarity for that. So you start pushing, somehow you start introducing those examples into the policy making debates, right? So until those principles are expressed in the law. So there's a gap between private law and public law.
Mhm.
Always there's a gap, the legislative gap. And that's what has happened in the last 250 years. You see, we've been the operating system was the operating commercial system, corporate system has developed based on a design, from the Industrial Revolution. So we're a little bit like oldie. So we need to reinvent ourselves.
Yeah.
Because the context has changed tremendously.
Exactly.
Just myself, I was born with 2.7 billion, and my own life, we're living, co-living with 7.4 billion.
Brilliant.
So
That says a lot.
and definitely we need to adapt. So so what I think, when going back to barriers, I think you have the cultural barriers,
Yes.
which we need to actually speak out, and how we go from sectors to holistic, pragmatic, systemic pragmatism, you see, and we need to learn how to be very pragmatic strategically and in operations, but systemically.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we all fall into the trap of being lineal, when we become pragmatic. We just look into, the profits and the dividends, and we forget about value creation. But even, value creation of the share value. I mean, we forget these things in the everyday, operations. That's my experience, at least. You see, in the case of Guayaki, for example, and but at the same time, I think we have, I mean, beyond the cultural barriers, we do have, the barriers in competition, as you mentioned before, and because we again fall under the notion of short-term competitiveness.
Yeah.
And these have to do, of course, with a context where the externalities, the negative externalities, have been, accumulated massively and now we're sensing it in COVID. We're sensing it in the different climate, climate change effects. We're sensing it in the loss of biodiversity, in its implications, the fires, massive fires, I don't know, floods everywhere in the world. I mean, this is throughout the world, throughout the earth. And so I'm not sure if we can be that cautious about, about the competitiveness and barriers that emerge from competitiveness when we have the kind of threats, global threats that we're all living through. So, and of course, eventually we will need to, when we drink a cup of coffee in Britain, in Europe, or in a country like Argentina, we will need to include the price of all those externalities.
Exactly.
We will need to invest. We will definitely need to invest in the countries of origin, in their ecosystems, in a good payment. I mean, for the suppliers, and the suppliers will need to pay dignified wages to their employees or to the entrepreneurs. But eventually we'll need to do that. And we all know that we're not doing this. I mean, bananas that you eat and we eat on this end of the earth, we're not including the cost.
No.
I mean, the food cost.
No.
So that needs to be done. And to do that requires overcoming the political barriers of North-South.
Yeah.
We need to understand ourselves as a a common destiny, and whatever we do in the North that is good for the entire earth and the world will be good for the entire humanity. So and vice versa. So we need to do this eventually. So we need to overcome the North-South divides in that conversation.
Definitely. No, that's music to our ears. You're absolutely right. And maybe just picking up on the value and thinking about the fuller sense of where value is created all the way through the chain. Your role in a wonderful B Corp called Gayaki, which makes latte. You will tell us a little bit about it. Maybe you could also just describe there, I think, the really exciting thinking around kind of what you might call stakeholder management, how those who are running the company are really thinking about all the contributions that are the kind of external benefits in a way that are reliant, that we need to make the company work. So maybe you could just take us on a little bit of a journey. I've heard you talk about it before, and it's a lovely picture. You're about to be subject to the creation of this.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, Wayaki was born because of the stakeholders. It was born because of one major stakeholder, which is the South Atlantic forest, which used to be the second largest forest ecosystem in the Americas after the Amazon. And there is only 7.8% left. And that means, 7.8% left of ecosystem services, of oxygen production, of carbon capturing, of flood controls, of genetic pool, of recreation. But it also means lots of communities that have had to actually go to slums, and let me be very blunt, of large cities, because they couldn't sustain themselves any longer. Because once you lose your ecosystem, you also lose your knowledge of how to actually live in nature. So that means lots of tribes and lots of campesino cooperatives that needed to go to the cities, which is a big problem throughout the world, right? So it was born that way. And at the same time, this is in Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. At the same time, it was the inner core of one of the founders. And I always try to refer to the spiritual inner callings, because that's, for me, where we all have the most powerful source of energy to decide and to take the risk of what needs to be done. So that's where Alex Pryor, or Alejandro Pryor in Argentina, decided to go for it and found partners in California. And that's how the company started. And the business model is basically very simple. It pays for yerba mate, that's a mate, the mate leaves, pays for the mate leaves of standing trees from 40 to 60% more than the market value. And to indigenous suppliers and to the landless movement of cooperatives in the three countries. and that's the differential of organic, because of course it's organic, but it's the differential of organic to regenerated. Because once you start paying nature, the natural capital, you pay for that, you see. Of course, you do it through the suppliers, the supply chain, but you pay for an additional, a value in the price. Then you start incorporating the cost of regeneration, because of course the suppliers want more pieces of land so they can actually harvest more of those leaves from the standing trees. So that's the way you start helping nature to return back. So nature is the one that actually does the job. The only thing that's done by the suppliers is that they get, the more money from the leaves of standing trees. So they help more trees to expand. So that's the model. Now that becomes the basic ingredient of the products of Guayaquil, which are the mate, as known in South America and lots of places in the world today, but also the energy boosting drinks that compete with, with brands like Red Bull, for example. globally. And of course, there was a market niche, there was a market opportunity, because these companies are still businesses that look for market opportunities. And the opportunity when it was created was the need for alternatives to coffee as a boosting energy.
Right.
And so that's the way it started in California. And it expanded throughout North America and Chile, and now gradually also in South America, the products. I'm speaking about the products. What's interesting is that once you create value for the stakeholders, and in this case, the local communities, the tribes, and nature as stakeholders, then you have new complices. You see, you have new complices, which are of course, the clients, customers who say, I like your product. Well, it's more nutritious, of course, because it has the nutrients of the ecosystem. If you have a single crop, you just have the nutrients of that crop. Now, if you have I don't know, if you have part of nature, the leaves, then you have all the ecosystem
in your coffee, in your cup of tea.
Yeah, exactly. Expressed in your tea. It's not a tea; it's in the leaf. In your mate. There you go. And so basically, what happens is that others start saying, "I want to be part of that piece," and those others could be the clients, the customers. Those others can be investors. Those others can be volunteers. Guayaquil has more than 2,000 volunteers, students who want to show that regenerative business is possible, but that it requires a different design. And Guayaquil is one of the founding, B Corps in the world. So, just in the first set of B Corps, and thanks to the design, the legal design, and to the reporting system, the measuring and reporting system, and basically the B Corps enabled Guayaquil to express its identity, but that was already happening, with the different elements. Yes. So that's the design of Guayaquil, and of course you have musicians, you have come to life that sing regeneration, and today, once you start acknowledging all the interdependencies, then you start finding that we hadn't acknowledged the interdependence with the Amazon, because we are about 5,000 miles southwards from the Amazon ecosystem. So we're, where Iguazu is, the Iguazu Falls are. Anyway, so now there's this agreement, is an agreement with an organization, a Colombian Amazonic agreement, to acknowledge the value of rain, the rain that is pumped out of the Amazon. I don't know if it's known, but the Amazon pumps water up into the atmosphere, and then you get the winds. I don't know how you would say, it's called the alisos, alicious. I don't know. Winds are the names of the winds that blow the humidity down south, right? And the rainfalls are the ones in between 15 and 25% of the rainfall in the region where we have the suppliers comes from the Amazon. So we decided to incorporate into the cost structure a symbolic value of rain. You see, but that led us to acknowledge that we had stakeholders in the Amazon.
Yes.
And that by doing this, we started realizing that we have a big problem, that our cans of aluminum, you see, are the big problem. We haven't found a replacement of aluminum for the beverages, for the drinks. And the aluminum, as you probably also in North America, a lot of the aluminum comes from far away from China. And of course we have the carbon footprint of the aluminum, and the tracking of the labor conditions in China. So these are the new frontiers, or the new horizons where we need to acknowledge, how we're going to be dealing with a sound, holistic stakeholder management. But once you start doing it,
Yes.
it leads you, it reveals the next step, or it's like it unfolds what was common sense, but we hadn't thought about. You see,
Amazing. Yeah, exactly.
we never had thought of ourselves as a global company, but once you start understanding yourself from an interdependence and a collective being, then you become global naturally in this global economy.
Yes.
So we need to rethink a lot now in our new phase.
Yes, exactly.
And of course, as a shareholder, I'm very happy to say that we achieved more than 60,000 hectares. So that's about 200,000 acres of regenerated ecosystem. We've achieved more than 1,200 families returning back to live together, with food sovereignty and living together, and 600% in that my increase in my share value in 6 years. So not from this year, before. So everything is very holistically harmonious.
Absolutely.
Although I never thought of 600%. I never thought of those
a nice
figures.
side, but what a
my experience.
Exactly, and what a wonderful example of an entire way of thinking of interdependence at its absolute core, and not thinking of the environment as something really that we either draw from or take to or give to, but a really integrated part of our system.
Yes.
So beautiful.
And you know what, Katie? At the same time, what's great about, at least in the case of Guayaquil, is that they now have a serious, now I should have said that before, but solid and sound board, and incorporated, directors, which are impact directors, and which are incredibly, insightful, that also help us to say, well, which are going to be our KPIs, in all along the way, which is big. Once you go into that, it's hard to not to do a scoping of what you can do this next cycle, because otherwise you're drowned into the almost infinite. You see, because we're all part of the, we're all stakeholders of each other.
Yes,
so,
that's a beautiful way of thinking of it. Pedro, this is love. I mean, I would love for us to talk continuously for the next hour or two, but I fear that people who are listening in will not have the opportunity to hold on too much longer. So I just wanted to finish with, and I know you have many other examples, and we may find another time to come back to further discussions when we're a little bit further forward with our European Commission discussion, because I think there's so much to share. But just if you were to give a message to us in Europe about what we see as the opportunity and how we could potentially respond to it, could you just leave us with some of your thoughts of the significance you feel of the opportunity we may have, and of the moment we're right in, what we could achieve if we are seeing a really brave set of legislators? What could it really do?
Well, I'm not European, but I always looked into the pioneerism that you find in Europe, starting with integration. I mean, Europe has basically done the pioneering forefront of integration for the entire world. I mean, we need to transit towards a completely new geopolitics and new way of organizing ourselves, politically and economically. And Europe is actually always in that forefront, in the frontiers of how to do that, and helps other regions of the world to actually take the risk as well. And Europe has not suffered from being European. I know that there are always some navigation going on in that respect, but has not suffered. And we might, by suffering, I mean, we haven't, you can't see Europe suffering in terms of poverty, in terms of human rights, in terms of affecting negatively its own environment. You see, you see always progress. Now, the next phase, in my view, for any continent, any region, is to think and act globally, and to redesign its own governance in light of the global needs, and in light of really elevating our global humanity needs. You see, and of course it will definitely affect costs, because once you start internalizing, typical environmental costs and the social costs, then obviously we will need to put our creativity and innovation in other dimensions, but not in the costs. You see, not by lowering down costs. To do our value creation in other dimensions, which I'm sure Europe will be able to do. And also, one last message: it has to move hearts. European companies need to move hearts, and hearts are moved when you do good, and when you actually, Patagonia moves hearts, and European companies need to move hearts, and create global community, and enable people from all over the world to be constructors of a shared legacy.
Yeah, exactly.
And at a global level. So I feel that Europe has all the strength and all the creativity to do that. It will happen.
We just seize the moment. Well, thank you, Pedro. It's a beautiful place for us to land. So thank you. And I really hope everyone on the call is part of the challenge to make that happen. And it's a really exciting journey that we're going on together, because there are no sort of blueprints for this. It's absolutely experimental, but that's part of the extraordinary power of doing this together. So just to everybody listening, please do look us up on we've created this Interdependence Coalition, which is really our kind of our sort of amplification of what it is we see we could do if this opportunity from the Commission is realised. So please do have a look at that, interdependence.eu, interdependencecoalition.eu. Have a look on the site, join us, be part of this this change that I think is really on the cusp of happening. And please enjoy just listening to Pedro and others who have been on our Coffee and Good Company series before, so that you can see and think about how that could be useful for your own companies. And let us know if you'd like to be part of one of these discussions. We'd be delighted to hear from you. And thank you for your time. Bye-bye.